Good evening, good evening. This is Right On Air. Right On Air is made possible by the generous contributions of KZFR supporters and by Members First Credit Union, created by the community for the community. Members First is a member-owned, not-for-profit financial institution providing checking, savings, loans, and credit cards to residents of Butte, Glenn, Shasta, and Tehama counties. For more information, visit m1cu.org. Well, how are you doing, Rob?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Man, it's been so long since I've had a second voice in here with me. This is fantastic.
Right, yeah. It's nice to have vaccinated humans live on the air in the studio.
Nice to have vaccinated humans. End of sentence right there. My goodness. Well, before we start this and before I let you speak anymore, I want to give you an intro because this is pretty packed. So let me roll this for you real quick. This is Rob Davidson. Rob Davidson's most recent book is What Some Would Call Lies, Novellas by Five Oaks, 2018. His previous short fiction collections include Spectators, Flash Fictions, Five Oaks, 2017. David's fiction, essays, and interviews have appeared in Ziziva, Hayden's Ferry Review, Indiana Review, New Delta Review, South Dakota Review, and elsewhere. His honors include a Fulbright Award, multiple Pushcart Prize nominations, and an AWP Intro Journals Project Award in fiction. He teaches creative writing and American literature at California State University, Chico. It's a shame I didn't have you. That would have been great.
Thanks. Thank you for having me on your show. I've been on before, and it's always a pleasure.
It's fantastic having you.
I'm really looking forward to talking with you about my new work.
Oh, yes. Before I wanted to dive into this one, because I read this a couple days ago, and unfortunately for you guys, we're going to get a snippet of this piece, not the full one. I'm so sorry. But if you want to read this, can I just give them the link, I guess,
yeah,
the Dappled Business? Or
you can either go to the website for Dappled Things, the literary journal, or if you go to my website, there's a link right on the front page, robdavidsonauthor.net. But it's a new short story called Unfinished Business, and the link is free. You can read it for free online.
Cool.
Yeah, and we'll mention that again in probably in a few minutes.
Yeah, and within the next day or two, I'll have this on a Facebook post, so it'll be shouted out there a little bit more.
Right on.
Yeah. Oh man, tell us a little bit about this one because I don't even want to talk. This piece was amazing.
Well, thanks. So it's a new short story. I'm working on a couple of projects. One of them is a book of short stories and novellas, and this short story, Unfinished Business, the protagonist in the story is a guy named Mark. He lives in Sacramento. He's divorced. He's got an adult daughter in college. And it comes to his attention that his divorced ex-wife is going through some difficulties. He lives in Sac. She lives in San Francisco. And early in the story, we learn that she has early onset Alzheimer's. So what, kind of memory lapses and things that they'd noticed over time and just kind of written off as whatever absent-mindedness or eccentricities or whatever, turned out it was a growing, developing situation that's early onset Alzheimer's is relatively rare. Alzheimer's, of course, is common, unfortunately. But early onset is relatively rare, but it does sometimes affect people in their 50s or 60s or even earlier. And so that's kind of the opening click, if you will, in the story is that Mark has to start thinking about the situation that his ex-wife is in, and the daughter is urging him to help, but it was an unhappy split. And Mark has moved on, and in his mind, he doesn't owe this woman anything.
a few complicated emotions when your daughter reaches out to you saying, "Hey, my mother, your ex-wife, needs help, and I need help."
Yeah, and so a fundamental moral question that comes up in the story is, what do we owe one another? What do we owe family, even when we're estranged from that family or some kind of rupture or break has occurred? Certainly, it's pretty common in the States that there are families where parents have gone their separate ways, but the kids are still in the mix, and so I think a lot of readers can identify with that. And, Mark's initial hesitancy or even refusal to engage gets challenged in the story because it turns out his ex-wife is in a lot of trouble, not just dealing with early onset Alzheimer's. She's also can't stay employed. can't pay her rent, can't just kind of get by, and she ends up later in the story homeless, and then some nasty things happen that really changed the game.
We talked about it we scratched it before the show on. It's unfortunate our healthcare system doesn't support more of these situations because, man, the situation that it ends up kind of popping up in the story. For those of you who are about to hear a snippet of this and then later go on, I'm sure, to read all of it on your own. This entire story brings up a lot of very intense points of discussion for emotions, for medical systems, for all sorts of really critical things.
Yeah.
And it, to your credit, is done in one of the most simply beautiful ways I've seen. Well done on this writing piece. Yeah, this was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Right. It's eternally perplexes me that in the United States we are one of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world, one of the most powerful countries in the history of the world, and we can't provide basic, fundamental, universal health care to every citizen, resident, and maybe other people too. But we can't do that, and it's a shame on us because you look around the world, other so-called major developed countries, democracies, so-called Western nations, almost all of them, 99% of them, have some form of universal health care. The United States refuses to do that, which, in my personal opinion, is a moral blemish. And at no time was that made more paramount than during this pandemic, which is another huge topic. But so I guess one thing I want to say before I start reading from the story, all the stories new stories I'm working on were started within the last 4 to 5 years. So we could say during the Trump years. Mm-hmm. And it isn't that things like medical care and homelessness and so forth weren't issues before Trump's presidency. That, of course, is not true. But one might argue that the discourse changed, and the way we think and talk about compassion and generosity and tolerance and diversity, all of that got problematized during the Trump years, and in some cases in really terrible ways. It's a matter of public record that Trump and his party tried to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, for example, which would have taken away what few benefits we've managed to add on to the paltry minimum benefits that people can get in this country. So that was on my mind as I wrote this story. Not that they're like expressly political, kind of anti-Trump or whatever, but more like, wow, this issue has always been important. Healthcare, access to healthcare, homelessness, but especially in recent years, it seems like, well, we all know, living in California and in Chico too, the question of housing and housing affordability and access to housing, it just has gotten sharper, and the lines seem to have gotten deeper between the kind of for and against, if you will. But maybe I'll stop palavering and just read a little bit from the story.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to give you a couple other shows after this because this piece deserves some major discussion.
So I think to start with, I'll just read from the opening part of the story. Unfinished business. Claire dropped by Mark's Midtown Gallery one morning, visibly upset. I just got the worst phone call from Mom's roommate. Apparently, Solange had gone for a walk in Golden Gate Park and gotten lost. She found the roommate's number in her cell and texted her. The roomie walked down to the park, found Solange, and brought her home. Solange was perfectly sweet about the whole thing, but the roommate told Claire, "Your mother misses work shifts. She can't remember where she works. Some days she's fine, has it all together, but on the bad days she just seems lost." I don't mean to pry, the woman said, but I think there's something, way wrong. The lapses had started years ago when Solange still lived in Sacramento. Missed lunch dates, misplaced keys and wallets, forgetting where she'd parked her car. She laughed it off, making quips about middle age. Mark didn't think much of it. Solange had always been absent-minded, caught up in herself, the star of her own absurd cabaret. Now his daughter stood before him, insisting that it was time to do something. Her mother needed tests. She needed help, their help. Mark closed his eyes. Claire might be right, but damn it if that didn't touch a nerve. It seemed that he would never, ever get past this woman's place in his life. Just hearing her name sometimes felt like being stabbed in the side. One good thing to come out of the divorce, he decided, was the freedom from obligation. And Solange, bless her fickle heart, never asked for anything. She had at least that much dignity, that and a truckload of pride. He rose from his chair and hugged his daughter. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, I can't." "Dad?" Claire might not understand, but Solange would. Not that she'd ever ask. Anyway, that was enough. So in the next movement of the story, she gets diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and Claire makes the first suggestion that, they need to do something like maybe go and get her. And initially Mark says no. He's not at all interested.
As anyone probably would in that situation. No, I'm divorced here and happily so. I'm good. I'll be fine for now.
Yeah. But he does, at the end, so the story's in sort of chapters or movements, and at the end of the first movement, Mark decides, well, if he's going to deny his daughter, he needs to do something maybe behind the scenes to kind of help Solange, his ex-wife, figure things out. So he trots down to San Francisco to talk to her, but it does not go well. And, anybody who's had like a difficult split or an old relationship knows it's real easy to pick the scabs open if you aren't careful.
Instantly. Instantaneous.
And
not
so
even trying.
Things don't go well. And so at the end of that first movement, Mark's like, the heck with it. I'm just not even going to, it's not my problem. I'm not going to deal with it.
My contribution to this conversation could be maybe don't call them movements, call them punches. Because as you read through this, it kind of felt like watching someone chip a statue. Every kind of next movement was a chip off the thing emotionally and
you want
more so.
Numbering the movements or whatever is just a way of calling attention to the structure, which I don't always do. But when I wrote this story, I was thinking very consciously about the movements of thought and emotion and the way that, sometimes relationships are like chess, right? Somebody makes this move, so you think about it and you kind of plan out what your next move's going to be. And then once in a while you get surprised and you have to make a move that you hadn't planned to make. And that's kind of the way that if you will, the logic of the story goes.
Yeah.
Mark is resistant, but, for some of us, there are things that force you to overcome whatever reluctance or resistance you have. Certain, you can call it love, you could call it moral or ethical responsibilities, or just maybe guilt.
Yeah, I would say, I'm trying to really mince my words here so I don't give anything away, because this is definitely worth the read and definitely worth the whole journey of kind of seeing how this plays out. This piece will show you someone's line emotionally.
Yeah.
When it's been crossed, when it's been, not crossed because of, you crossed my line and now I have rules and guidelines. No, but more of a, this has to happen. Mm-hmm. This is necessary. How I feel about it, kind of irrelevant. Has to happen situation. And you do that like walking downstairs in this piece. And each movement is one step down that stair. And by the end of it, I don't know if you plan to continue this, but the end of it feels like a beautiful, beautiful stopping point without stopping.
Yeah.
This is we've finished it, but there's still a lot that is being discussed, and this will continue on. Granted, this isn't real people that we're talking about, but this still feels like it's being breathed at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Again, anybody who wants to read this story can you can go to the Dappled Things website. I think it might be dappledthings.org. The literary journal, or you can go to my webpage, robdavidsonauthor.net, and there's a link right on the front page. Says my latest story. But yeah, so you do have the
Dappled Things, DAPPLED things.org, and then unfinished business. So you can probably find that in there.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, the journal. It's a reference to Gerard Manley Hopkins. But yeah, so the ending, which we may or may not get to look at too closely here today, but it's. I'm fond of open-ended stories, so stories that leave a little to the imagination and don't neatly wrap up everything in a real, predictable way. But I didn't want to leave this one hanging, too much in the wind. So, Mark does eventually agree to bring Solange into the house. There doesn't seem to be any other options. But again, that presents various problems. Just kind of anybody who's dealt with a family member who had Alzheimer's knows and tried to care for that family member. My grandmother had it and eventually, passed away from complications related to it. So I remember quite distinctly how hard it is to try to deal with a person who is going through that and kind of asking the same questions over and over and getting frustrated and all that. It can be really difficult and demoralizing. And then when you add in, the unfinished business of an unhappy divorce or something like that, it can be tough. But I thought I might read a brief section from the middle of the story where Mark kind of gets talked into changing his mind with the help of his daughter. So Solange has eventually gotten, got kicked out of her apartment. She couldn't pay rent. She couldn't hold down a job. And somehow or another, she ended up homeless in Golden Gate Park, where she was sexually assaulted and got taken to Zuckerberg General Hospital in SF, which is the quote-unquote is where they take the homeless people in San Francisco if you don't have a residence. So they go down there and see her there, and she's not in very good shape. Over the next 2 days, they pieced together what they could. Solange had been evicted from her apartment in February after falling behind on the rent, no known current address. She'd been flopping on friends' couches, then things took a turn. She couldn't remember exactly what had happened, how she ended up sleeping in the park. She had no address book. Her phone had been stolen or lost, and then the attack, of which she had no memory. Probably a blessing, the doctors said. The rape kit confirmed there had been a sexual assault. Mark returned to Sacramento. He had a show opening in 2 weeks, for which he was behind schedule. Claire stayed on in San Francisco, sitting with Solange for every available visiting hour, holding her hand. She called home each night to update Mark and discuss options. They agreed that Solange could no longer care for herself. The days of independent living were over. The question was where she would go. Mark insisted they research every option. The next Sunday, when the gallery was closed and Mark had a little time, he drove back to the city to see Solange, who looked much better, and have lunch with Claire. He took her to Delfina in the Mission for lunch. Then they walked over to Mission Dolores Park. They sat on a bench at the top of the hill, overlooking the downtown skyline. Kids took turns riding skateboards down the long, curving sidewalk that ran the length of the park, rushing at breakneck speed, spilling out onto 18th Street. Claire reviewed what she'd learned. The city health plan did not cover long-term care. There were assisted care facilities for the homeless, but with limited space and availability. The same was true for hospice when it came to that. But I will never allow her to. Of course not, Mark agreed. We'll upgrade her insurance. What's she got in the bank? You know the answer to that. She must be eligible for assistance through Medi-Cal or something. He'd do the homework, research the options. He could pay some of it. Hell, he'd pay all of it. Though even as he said it, he knew it might be impossible. God bless America, land of cheap guns and overpriced health care. The consultant says Mom is one of the lucky ones, Claire said softly. She still has family who care. There's a lot who don't. A skateboarder came screaming down the sidewalk, crouched low, arms spread, sweeping back and forth in wide arcs until his board flew out from under him, spilling him into the grass. A shaved ice vendor, pushing his cart up the steep hill, stopped and shook his head. Tanto estúpido. Mark laughed. He wasn't sure why. Dad, Claire said, it's time. Yeah, we should get back. She put a hand on his arm. To take her home. Mark looked into Claire's gray eyes, strikingly identical to her mother's, one of their closest shared features. The urgency of the moment had settled on her. He saw that. A resolve emanated from her, something cool and focused. She was a woman now, 22 years of age. She knew what she wanted. She wanted to care for her destitute, broken mother. This meant taking Solange into their home, an impossible and yet somehow inescapable conundrum. the look in her eyes, a fierceness that demanded consent.
I really like this scene when I was reading it, because it kind of, if I could paint it in a Hollywood movie or something, this is the scene where you're kind of sitting there numbed, making the decisions of what you're trying to do because you've gone through all the options. There's not really anything else to do.
Yeah.
And I loved the little moment that you had of the skateboarder just flippantly, going crashing, not really in the same life position where, an injury is.
Yeah, there's a kind of youthful carelessness there. Last couple times I've been to Mission Dolores Park, I watched those kids, and it's just like, what are they thinking? That's a steep hill. And then when they spill, it's amazing. So, right, yeah, thank you. I thought it was an artful contrast to the kind of Solange is out of control, and clearly damage has been done to her. She's done some of it to herself, but other people have inflicted their damage on her. And yeah, Mark is in that point where, despite all the reservations, it seems like he's run out of options, and Claire's there to tip the balance because as the daughter, like we said, she's she's going to take care of her mother one way or another, and she's kind of insisting that Mark join her, and he does because fundamentally he can't abandon her, and so that's the question I want, one of the questions I want to ask of, readers, I guess, but anybody who's interested, is, this question about access to health care, this question about what we owe one another, why and how you can search your heart and come up with an answer other than, yes, we owe each other at least a bare minimum of care and access to health care and options. It's really terrible when you look around and see anyone, but especially the poor and the unhoused, people who simply don't have economic power and access and privilege, and for them to be turned away, for them to be denied when they have real problems, when they not just they're not sick, but when they actually have these problems, it's just unconscionable to me. So, that was one of the things on the forefront of my mind, because, if you've done any work with the unhoused or the homeless, I haven't done tons, but I've volunteered a bit, with Safe Space and handing things out and, some demonstrations and things like that. I write a lot of letters to the city council. But, when you talk to these folks, you realize you're just a heartbeat, a step away from where they are.
They're us.
Yeah, in some cases, just one unlucky roll of the dice, and you could end up there. That's a very humbling, realization. They're real people just like you and me, and they deserve, the fair treatment,
Yeah, everything we can give them. There's a moment a little bit later in the story, speaking of kind of having to accept this whole thing and why this is depressing that we don't have this. But there's a line that you have in there where I think they're sitting in the kitchen a little bit later down in this, a little bit past where you just read. Mm-hmm. And Mark, the father, says, well, Claire, my daughter, you don't pause your entire life. It's on, you don't worry about you go back to school, because she at this point has decided to stop school, and she's taken a year off to figure out what to do with her mother because her father doesn't. There's a complicated nuance there, but and she kind of just turns a little bit away and just kind of gazes out into nothingness into the kitchen and just says, this is my life. This is my mother, this is my mother. This is what I'm going to do.
Right.
So not only do we have situations where it's like, if someone who is on the street has situations like this, they're SOL, for better term, for lack of a better term. But even if, say, Mark wasn't in a situation or wanted to help the mother, this daughter is robbed of, in a small way, that's a very harsh way of looking at that, but is robbed of her own passion of doing what she wants to do.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kevin. And, for when I was drafting this story, initially I wrote some sections from Claire's point of view, because she's a character Mark is definitely moved by what happens when you're choosing a protagonist for a story. You usually want to pick the person with the most at stake and who's got to make the biggest change or go through the biggest conflict. And Mark definitely has some things to work through, but Claire does too. She's the emotionally wounded child of an unhappy split, and as a little girl, her dream was, like for a lot of kids from separated families, her dream was for her parents to find a way back to each other. And in a strange way, that happens in this story. So that moment that you allude to, is I hope it is I'm glad to hear it is a powerful moment for readers, because Mark's in some version of agony, but Claire's actually happy.
It's maybe I can add some more insight to that too, because this to me was like having someone just kind of put a nail up and just in my own heart, because I am an only child, and I look at situations like this with divorced parents going, oh God, this is a little bit terrifying, because I have a situation or come from a situation where maybe one of the other parents wouldn't want to help the other parent. And so looking at this and seeing, basically I resonated intimately with Claire's kind of perspective there. There was no hesitation of this. If that happens to one or both of my parents, that's my life now, and I'm okay with it. There's no second guessing that. And so that was like a really, that moment hit me pretty good.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad it resonated in a literary context.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a human truth. There are a lot of folks, like we said, from families that have split up for various reasons. So it's not uncommon. And but it shows you that out of a situation of for Solange, it's a situation of suffering and some degree of misery. Sometimes good things come out of that. Claire rises to the occasion, and even though from the outside, like you said, like she's not finishing school, so one narrative would be you're off track, but another narrative would be you've found a different focus, at least for now, and it involves helping someone, being compassionate and generous, and it's your mother, so that's a game changer. But really, Claire steps forward. And she steps forward before Mark can step forward and leads him. And that, every parent knows that sometimes your children can teach you a lot. So she kind of leads Mark in that direction. So yeah, the stakes are high for all of them in the story. And it's not exactly a happy ending, but Solange is safe at the end of the story, and Mark is definitely coming to terms with his responsibilities, I guess.
Yeah.
That he's accepted, with maybe grudgingly accepted, but he's accepted. But again, if anybody wants to read the story, you can go to dappledthings.org, the online literary journal. Well, it's a print journal too, actually, but the story is available online for free. dappledthings.org, Unfinished Business, Rob Davidson. And you can also go to my website, robdavidsonauthor.net, and the link is right on the front page there. So hey, thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, anytime. And I'll have extra links to all the things that he just mentioned on my Facebook, writingonair.org, I think, or /Facebook. I'm not sure what the link is for that, but it's on Facebook. Look up my thing. It'll be on there.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks, Rob. This has been fantastic having you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. This has been Right on Air. It's also made possible by the generous contributions of KZFR supporters and by Alternative Energy Systems.